Hello, everyone. Welcome to our virtual Q&A for National Geographic and Hulu's documentary series, City So Real. My name is Chris Lemaire, and I'm a programmer at the American Cinematheque. And I'm very thrilled to present this conversation with the director-producer of the series, Steve James, along with one of the series' key subjects, Dr. Amara Enyia. Our moderator is Michael Phillips, film critic of the Chicago Tribune. Before I turn it over to him, I just want to thank National Geographic, our partners on this event. We're so grateful to them for allowing us to put on this week-long National Geographic Spotlight. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Michael and welcome our guests.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Michael Phillips, the film critic of the Chicago Tribune, and it's my pleasure to be here hosting this American Cinematheque event around National Geo and Hulu's City So Real, the five-part series by filmmaker Steve James, and one of the key subjects and a recent mayoral candidate here in Chicago, as well as a political consultant and veteran community organizer, Dr. Amara Enyia will be joining us as well. Good to see you both.
Great to be here.
I have to indulge 30 seconds of my own personal woe, just being a film critic in Chicago. If Steve James takes on a long-form documentary project, you can damn well count on a series of updates to be written and explain to folks about how, well, it's not going to be a 2-hour this and that. It's going to be, and in fact, he's back out on the streets filming. And that, of course, was very much the case with the City So Real. But in retrospect, and even at the time, how could you not, with everything in the culture, everything in America, and specifically everything in Chicago, going where it was going during the pandemic, during the protests and the pushback after the George Floyd murder in Minneapolis in May 2020. How could you not go back and film? But I'd love to just get people who are new to the series, who have not seen it, and I hope do, because it is terrific. We're talking about, you began filming in 2018, yes, and you ended filming in mid-2020, is that right? Okay.
Yeah, I think our last shoot was maybe about 2 weeks before it aired, because we were working on that episode 5 right up to the bitter end, because we wanted it to be as current as we could make it, and still complete it in time.
Okay. It's more than just a story of a mayoral race, but that is, I guess you call it, the sort of the through line or the spine around which so much else happens. When did you two, Amara and Steve, when did you two first discuss filming? At what point in your candidacy would that have been?
Well, it was actually early on. We met completely unplanned. I was at the courthouse. This was at the beginning of the Jason Van Dyke trial and everything that was happening. And so I was out there with a bunch of folks who were there protesting, those of us who'd been active on just the Laquan McDonald issue for the previous years. And so I ran into Steve. I didn't know who he was, but he had a camera and some other things. And he told me that he was working on a film or a documentary about Chicago. And so I wasn't really thinking too much of it. There was a lot going on there in that day. But I was like, sure, I'll, participate.
Yeah, I mean, I think Amara liked I gave her my rap about, yes, we're following the mayoral race, but it's going to be a portrait of the city and the people here. And I do think that appealed to you. Even though by saying yes to us, you knew that we weren't going to be able to help you get elected because, we wouldn't be done in time. But you still, nonetheless, I think you really did like that idea.
Yeah, I mean, it was intriguing to me. It was interesting. I was more interested in the broader picture about Chicago than looking at this cast of characters that were running in the election. So that was appealing to me, and I liked that it wasn't like just focused on the candidacy and was really focused on the issues in the city. So yeah, that was definitely appealing.
I've never had a chance to ask anybody this regarding one of Steve's films, but what is Steve like as an interviewer?
Well, he's great. I mean, he's a very just natural. And I think that's something that really worked to his advantage is he comes at the filmmaking from a very organic place. And even the questions are organic and they're not sort of almost like pre-packaged. He understands how to be in the moment and to dissect the moment. And the questions, I think, follow that. And I think that was helpful for him getting into spaces that otherwise he may not have been able to get into, and introducing him to people who, you know, perhaps would be more skeptical of me or skeptical than me about a camera following them around. And I think that's because of his style and his ability to really blend in and focus on the story.
Steve, is this true? 400 hours of material by the time you finished, and you had to whittle that down to 6.5 hours.
Yeah. We actually did some editing. We had over 400 hours, and our first cut of just like I started with my co-editor David Simpson, editing, and I selected about 100 scenes that we had shot to edit, and I threw out at least 100 that we had shot, and that edit ended up being 12 hours long, and that's when we decided we think we have a docuseries, not a standalone doc. Because if we had tried to boil it all down to even one of my long documentaries, I think it would have ended up giving short shrift to the people more than the campaign. It would have ended up being driven much more by the mayoral election and maybe the trial, and less by really getting to know people in Chicago, which was one of the prime reasons I wanted to do it to begin with.
Yeah, it's a film about neighborhoods and fiefdoms, and what this city's really about. And for a lot of people who live here, and certainly for people who don't, it's going to be a revelation, I think, just to kind of see sort of the mosaic that emerges. But have you seen all 5 episodes, I should say, Amara?
Yes, I did.
Tell me what you. Was there a moment or a subject, maybe outside the mayoral race, that really kind of hit home for you, where you thought that's part of the city that needs to be told?
I mean, really, as someone who's been living in Chicago for so long, I think the brilliance of the film, the brilliance of the docuseries is that it reaffirms so much about the city, but it also shows you the city in a way that I've not really seen it before, to the point where it was so accurate, but it gave me a view that you can only get in that format. So the ability to show, because we always talk about Chicago is the city of neighborhoods and it's diverse and there are these different enclaves and different cultural enclaves and whatnot. But to see it in such a stark manner in the docuseries, where you're really seeing the different neighborhoods. So it'll go from a barbershop in South Shore, and then it'll cut to what's happening in Little Village. And then it'll be, you go to the one scene of the Oblivion on the north side, right? It's just a completely different environment. And to see all of that put together, it was jarring actually, but it was like, wow, that is so accurate. Like, it's like when someone articulates something better than you could ever say it yourself. That's how I felt when I was watching the series.
Steve, did you feel at any point that maybe more acutely than in other projects, there's several different kinds of film or series I could make with this thing. What is the right one?
Yeah, I mean, myself and my producing partner, Zach Piper, who's worked with me on a number of films now, and my son, Jackson, who was one of the prime DPs on this. We spent a lot of time, and other people on the team, we spent a lot of time talking about like, how do you do this? And we kind of came to a few sort of rules for ourselves. But I'm not one to stick to rules too much. But one of them was, we didn't want to do formal sit down interviews with people. We wanted to always be in their lives, and as Amara was talking about earlier, in terms of the, asking questions, to do it in the context of what we're filming, not, okay, Amara, let's plan to sit you down and have a conversation with you about running for mayor. And so I thought that was important, because I've always felt like that's the most genuine you get people anyway, than when you sit them down for a formal interview. The other thing is that we it's sort of, a homage actually to Chris Marker's La Jolie Mai. We wanted to let the film take us, and events take us where it took us. Yes, we were going to follow the mayoral election. Yes, we were going to follow the trial of Jason Van Dyke. But there were many days that we went out where we may know we were going to shoot something related to one of those at the beginning of the day. We had no idea where we were going later. And that was fine. It took a while to embrace that, because as organic as I like to be, that was a different level of organic. But we eventually got into that groove, and it was a really exhilarating way to make the film, because everything was grist for the mill. Anybody that, usually when you're making a documentary, people will say, hey, come up to you and go, hey, what are you doing? Hey, what about me? Why don't you talk to me? And usually it's sort of like you have to nicely decline, and move on. And in this film, it was sort of like, sure, what do you got to say? Put the camera on them and talk to them. And that was really kind of exciting. And it made the film feel, I think, as serendipitous as the experience was of making it. I hope in the editing we preserved that.
Are there moments in the film, Amara, where you, or the series, where you kind of are taken back to maybe some lessons inevitably learned by any first-time mayoral candidate in this particular city?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, admittedly, it took me a while so we had a chance to view the actual footage. I think it was like the first edit or something before it was done, to just check for accuracy, names, and that sort of thing. And it actually took me a while to be able to watch it, because it's really a process, and it's a really challenging experience for me anyway, because it was a serious endeavor. This wasn't just some hobby or something to do or for notoriety. And so it's really difficult, and there are a lot of very difficult moments that were captured through the course of the series, that having to go back and then relive those moments is actually quite hard. And so I had to mentally prepare myself to watch a lot of it. And then there are also things that I did not know that from other campaigns, that I was like, what? That was like, wow, that's really, really interesting. I had no idea that was what was happening over there. So it made it a very kind of a roller coaster experience in watching it. It was challenging, but also entertaining, I would say.
One of the other candidates you had a lot of access to and a lot of interest in, Steve, ended up winning, Lori Lightfoot. I'd have to ask Amara this: was Steve a little soft on Lori Lightfoot in the run-up?
I can't.
This is, let me just, the context being, it's been a tough couple of years for anybody running this city, but there's been certainly some maybe disillusionment in a lot of parts of the community about her work for the police department, with the police department, in the light of many of these things lately, and the teachers' strike, other things. I'll leave it to you now. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think Steve, I thought he was fair with the interview. I would say the whole city was soft on on Lori going into the runoff. I mean, there was just, it's one of those things where people just are, at least from what I've been hearing, they're feeling kind of duped, or they just didn't know. And it's hard to tell with that kind of, with what, 21 candidates, and then it's 14, and then it's down to 2. It's really hard to get the accurate sense of who these people are. I think the beauty of the series is that you see them in their most pure forms, outside of media spin, outside of drama. You actually do get to see more of their character. I thought that Steve handled her in a fair way, given the fact that most of the city perhaps thought they were getting something and ended up with something else. And also, who could have predicted a global pandemic? Who could have predicted uprisings in 2020? So there's just a lot there that I think forced her to come out in a way, or be exposed in a way, that may not have happened even in 4 years of what we would consider a normal administration. So she didn't really get the kind of grace period that any other mayor, especially a first-time mayor, would probably get.
Steve, what, you can't help but have an opinion or two, I'm sure, discreetly expressed as it will be, I'm sure, too, about
Yeah.
how it's been since, if you were making a movie right now focused on the winner, what intrigues you about, or catches your eye about the last couple of years?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a part of me that wishes we were still making the series, and that we had made at least another couple of episodes by now. And it was interesting because in the run up to the election, I took Lori at how I encountered her. And as Amara said, I think that the city as a whole, she was kind of an unknown factor, and she did run. Ultimately, she came from nowhere, and I think ran a pretty shrewd campaign because she identified the machine as the enemy, and that she was going to be the person who was the anti-machine. And she also presented herself in very progressive terms. I mean, I know some people have watched the series now and said, she came out against Lincoln Yards in the series, and what did she do when she could have done something? So there are things she says in our series that have not been proven to be where she's at now. And I think the real challenge for us then became in episode 5, which was, okay, how do we deal with her now? Because even at that point, when we made episode 5, she had a lot of detractors. She had a lot of people that felt like she was not, she was too sympathetic to the police, that she wasn't willing to consider defund the police, any kind of legislation that moved resources away from the police. And so, we felt like it was our duty to sort of give her opportunity to speak up, but also to hear from the people who were critical of her, which we did. And I think if I was doing an episode now, it would probably, to be fair to the zeitgeist of what's going on, it would probably be more critical of her because of where she finds herself vis-a-vis the city of Chicago and the issues that are unfolding now. I mean, a lot's happened since we finished that episode that has been even tougher for her, I think.
Yeah. Just for folks who don't know the timeline, and most people don't, there were 4 episodes premiering 2 months before the serious lockdown period of the pandemic. This is January 2020 at the Sundance Film Festival, yes? Because I saw.
Yeah. We thought we had finished the series with the election of mayor. But then because we were unable to sell the series when the pandemic hit, everything kind of ground to a halt. And then I just started to realize while I was sitting here at home, like, we've got to do something about this pandemic, because the series is going to feel like ancient history if we don't deal with it. And then, so we started to do some filming very carefully, mostly over Zoom. And then when George Floyd hit, we just said, we have to get back out in the streets and really do this as a full-on episode. So that's what we did. And yeah, so the series came out in October of 2020. So before the end of 2020, but that last episode, which is 80 minutes, deals with the pandemic and sort of a year into Lightfoot's tenure and everything that was going on.
You have a question that kind of jumps on something we've all talked about already, but it says, it goes like this: beyond what we saw in episode 5, when you followed up with various characters, have you heard from anybody who was unhappy or maybe very happy for how they were portrayed? You've already gotten one, you thought you were fair here, but tell me about some of the other folks. I mean,
we make a habit. I mean, it's part of our approach is to show principal subjects in the films or docuseries, the film itself, or if it's too complicated, like a series like American to Me, where there were so many people and so many episodes, we absolutely make a point of showing folks all their scenes so that before it's ever done, so that not so we can get permission to use it. I don't hand over editorial control. But I take very seriously that I want their feedback on how we're portraying them. And that over the years, it's always made the films better, in my view. There have been some hard conversations where I've had to say no, like I know that needs to stay in the film. There's also been things I've changed because people have said, that's not what I meant, or, it's like, I want to be fair. So it's a tricky thing to promise, but it's sometimes I've regretted it, but mostly I have not regretted it. And so in this case, we shared it with all of the candidates, for example, who allowed us access to them. So like Amara and Lori, although I never heard from Lori before it was done about what she thought. Neil Salas Griffin, Willie Wilson, the people who really granted us access all got a chance to see it and weigh in. And we didn't hear anything, Amara expressed some concerns about some stuff. We talked about it and she was fine. Basically what we heard back from people was positive, or we didn't hear back from them. And then there were other people like Tracy, the Lyft driver, who I stayed in contact with. She saw her scene. Certain people that had really prominent individual scenes, we made a point of showing those scenes to them in advance if we could, to just give them a chance to see it and tell us what they thought. And I'm happy to report that people pretty much across the board were happy. I did hear from Lori Lightfoot via text at one point after she'd watched the first 2 episodes finally. I mean, it was already out. And she sent me a text. She said, I'm really enjoying it. And when I finish watching it, I'll get back to you. And then I never heard back from her. So that was that.
The great communicator. Yeah. Amara, what were your what did you have to say to Steve about that? What questions about what he was focusing on, or what? Tell me about the conversation you did have with Steve at that point.
Yeah, I actually don't remember. I don't remember what the reservations that I had were.
I do.
Okay, yeah.
It was Christy.
Oh yeah. Oh. Oh yeah. How could I forget? See, this is how your mind just blocks stuff out. So we had that. Yeah, that was one thing, because we had she was a volunteer on the team who had decided in some bizarre twist of events to then sabotage the campaign. And so it was like, I had forgotten completely about her, because this happened, I think in like December, maybe. It was still maybe like early December. So it wasn't late in the game. So I had completely forgotten and sort of just dismissed this person in my mind. And then when I was watching the replay, that's when I was like, oh, her. So then I'm like, Steve, she shouldn't.
Yeah, and she had a more prominent role in communications earlier on. Yeah. And so we had a number of scenes that featured her.
Yeah.
And then when she left the campaign, it was a kind of a weird. We actually filmed Amara about it. We actually talked to Amara about it, about her leaving the campaign. We had the potential to deal with it in the series, but we ended up deciding not to deal with that. But we did keep her in the early part of the series because she played this vital, role in the scenes that we got. And I think it was just tough for Amara to see her.
Yeah, that's it. I thought it was legit. It was a legit reason. So what I was like kind of rolling my eyes, but it was true. Like she had been there. And so, I don't necessarily believe in just erasing someone. I can erase her from my mind, but you don't have to erase her from the film. So yeah.
Well, I should ask one question about this, Amara. The media coverage of your campaign, it was sort of preceded and sort of like clouded by, questions of financial impropriety and sort of inferences and not accusations, but this was swirling around a lot of the coverage, and it is the kind of thing that I think would make a politician or any public figure really damn wary of trusting somebody with a camera or a notebook. Talk to us about that, because that issue isn't going to go away even if this film is done. These other issues, it's a tricky relationship.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. I thought that, I think because with the film, with the series, it was approached, like Steve's approach was it was just very natural. It was authentic. It was honest. And so especially having a journalism background, I already know that the media is not a friend. They're definitely not in politics, right? So there wasn't an expectation of sort of the same kind of relationship as a documentary film series, which is really just kind of coverage without a voice, without like a preachiness that can happen. And I think it's the media, I think was a little strange in the campaign, because what the focus was on are on things that now, with the pandemic, with people who are actually going through economic hardship for the last couple of years, it would be distasteful to report on. So for me personally, as knowing what my background is and how being an organizer and choosing a less lucrative career, that it would create, I'm not going to be rolling in money, but to have the media so fixated on things like student loans, which I had, or on things like rent payments, having to pay rent, things that a large percentage of Chicagoans actually experience, but to have it sort of characterized as a character flaw, I thought was a little distasteful and problematic with how the media covered the issue. Because if you fast forward a couple of years later to the pandemic, those very same issues that they sort of blew up and made character issues are now affecting so many Chicagoans. So I think the coverage, if the campaign were taking place now, those are the things that they pulled out for my campaign, I don't think that they would actually touch it. And then if you add the racial element of being a Black woman on the west side of Chicago, all of that comes with that, you kind of look back and say, what were they thinking? But because I come out of, I have a background in journalism, so I wasn't expecting, these are friends. But I do think that the coverage was lacking in the campaign. And I say that not as someone who, I'm very thick-skinned, so it's whatever. But when you think about how issues are covered, you start to think, how do we treat candidates based upon wealth, based upon their money, based upon if it's younger candidates who are struggling economically, do we demonize them? We've had wealthy mayors. We always had wealthy mayors, and yet you didn't see the kind of attacks making character flaws, essentially almost like criminalizing people who are low income and saying that because they're low income, then they're not qualified to run for office. And I think that's the narrative that the media pushed. But in the documentary, you're just seeing this woman who's running for mayor, and it didn't have all of those other, I think, lenses that the media added to the campaign.
Well, yeah, I think what we tried to do with that part of your story, and I'll give another example, is, one of the things that we noticed when we were out shooting more newsworthy things like the campaigns or the trial, there's the everyday media that are there, and God love them. It's a hell of a job, and they do it day in and day out, you know. But our orientation was different. Our orientation was, we're making a scene from that. We're not looking for bites. We're not looking for sound bites or video bites for a news story. We're making a scene from it. So when Amara goes before the media and they're kind of really peppering her with all these questions, and she's speaking up in her defense and making some of these points she just made, I feel like it's an opportunity for you to sort of see the way it works, and both for her to be able to speak up for herself, but also see the way it works in the media, where people are trying to get that soundbite, get that gotcha thing from her. Similarly, when we filmed Tony Preckwinkle, who was someone who did not give us access, but it didn't matter because we showed up at events for her. When we showed up at that Logan Square endorsement, you know, if you looked at the news stories of that event, it would be just a little quote from her, an endorsement from, you know, the alderman, and that's what it is. But we made it into a scene about her as a candidate and her, I think, her struggles with campaigning and being able in command of the topics. And you know, the news media would never show that, because if they did, they would lose access to her. But we didn't have that access, so we can show a more candid view of how something like that unfolds.
There's a question for you, Steve. Steve, are there any other filmmakers, documentary or otherwise, that continue to inspire you? You've mentioned Chris Marker, among others, a documentary filmmaker. People have sort of talked a little bit about Frederick Wiseman's documentaries. Is, you know, there's those elements of Wiseman in, say, they've seen about, that's all that incredibly granular stuff at the Board of Elections, which plays every note of insane sort of minutia and boredom, and then suddenly this riveting one-act play about power struggles that nobody ever sees in an election. It's fantastic material. But anyway,
well, thank you. I mean, our joke while we were filming that, because we spent a lot of days there, as you can imagine, is that if Frederick Wiseman came to Chicago to do a film on the election, the entire film would be called Board of Elections, and that he would never leave that space. I just, you know, we could have made that film, but I just, there's no way I could make that film. Not that way. There's a lot of filmmakers. I mean, there's so much great work being made now. I mean, historically, you know, Marker's films for sure. Also, you know, early Barbara Koppel work was very influential to me. The 7 Up series was very influential to me, with Michael Apted. In terms of contemporary films, I mean, you know, I think, oh God, there's a lot of great filmmakers. I'm almost reluctant to start saying names, because then there'll be somebody I leave out. You know, I think, for instance, now I'm spacing on his name, but the filmmaker made Collective this year.
Oh, the Romanian film, fantastic documentary.
Yeah, and he's an incredible talent. He made a film a few years ago called Toto and His Sisters, which I saw as a judge at a film festival, and we gave it the top prize. And it was kind of like, we hadn't even heard of it, but it was so good and so powerful. You see the same you see the same filmmaking skill at work in that film that you see in Collective. I mean, there's just so many filmmakers out there doing extraordinary work these days. I'm sorry if I'm gonna not name
That's
it.
fine. We're flying. We got 2 more, and I want 2 questions for Amara, and then 1 more for Steve, and we're gonna call it an event. This is for Amara. Is it surreal for you to watch the Lightfoot that you competed against in the film versus the Lightfoot now? We've talked about this. Is there a sense of vindication for you, or is it something else?
It's definitely vindication. I mean, I think I believe firmly that, you know, you are who you are wherever you are. And so it's going to come out. Like, your character is not something that you can run from, you can't hide from it. One of the reasons why I really enjoyed the film was because I feel it was such an honest depiction of who everyone actually is. And so I could only go so far because I wasn't going to do the kind of campaign, I wasn't doing mudslinging and all that other stuff. So we really just had to run on our vision and run on, my platform. But there were some times where, we would make some comments, like we started drawing that distinction between her campaign and our campaign early on. But then we were like, let's just focus on our campaign. We knew about who she was because I knew before even the mayoral election, because I've been involved in organizing work in the city. But we also believe that Chicagoans will make their choice. And this is just one of those things where Chicagoans made their choice. And to be fair, I mean, a lot of them, if you kind of fly under the radar, you're not going to really know. And Toni Preckwinkle was a more known factor. So people just didn't know what they were getting with Lori Lightfoot. They had their hopes on what they would get. But I think that, again, your character is what it is, no matter where you are and in whatever position you're in. And now I think people are like, oh, all the things that you were saying. I mean, I've been getting that for 2 years. Oh, everything that you were saying. Oh, I wish. But, people made their choice. And I think we just kind of, roll with the punches.
There's another election coming up, I believe, in 2023. Are you going to run?
I'm still recovering from 2019. In all fairness, I'm still recovering. But I mean, I can't even imagine. It's like right around the corner already, and it feels like it was yesterday. So yeah, that would be a tall order.
Steve, let's go out with this one. It's a good.
No, I'm not running. I'm not running.
Nominated, I will not
I vote
run.
for you, Steve.
Thank you.
The Village of Oak Park can't afford the loss. Yeah. Did you know going into this project that the series would be a reflection of America as a whole, even though you're focused on one city?
That was our hope. I mean, I've always seen Chicago in that way, right? It was once called by someone who I can't remember the quintessential American city. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that. What was interesting, Michael, I think I even talked to you about this at one point around Sundance, that at first, potential buyers didn't see that. They saw it as too regional. They saw it like, well, this is a story of Chicago, but how does this relate to America? And I was kind of like, are you kidding me? This city is every bit about what America's about. And I think one of the things that I feel fortunate about is that Nat Geo got that, who bought it eventually, and that certainly by the time you get to the end of episode 5, if you haven't gotten it already, you certainly, I hope, see that this city reflects America in so many ways and what's going on in America, the good, the bad, the ugly, it's all here.
For those who haven't seen it, City for Real is still streaming on Hulu. Yes, absolutely.
Yes,
and,
it is.
It earns every minute of the 6.5 hours. And Amara, I'd like to thank you for participating tonight. It's really good to meet you. And Steve, thanks for your time, and good to talk with you again.
Yes, always great to talk. Thanks for doing this.
Steve, Amara, Michael, thank you so much for this. Our time just flew by. Again, echoing what Michael said, seek out the series if you haven't seen it yet on Hulu. We're certainly hoping for more episodes, Steve. So fingers crossed. So that can continue on, of course. But thank you, Michael, for leading this awesome discussion, and thank you to our audience for tuning in and sending in all your questions.